A young, poor man arrived at a restaurant starving, only to be denied a simple plate of food. Years later, he returned as the owner and discovered a secret about the waitress that broke his heart. Michael walked slowly, dragging his feet through the cold, empty streets of the city. His slumped shoulders and aimless gait mirrored the sadness devouring him inside. He was only 21, yet the lines of suffering and the shadow in his eyes made him appear much older. He wore an old jacket that had once belonged to his mother, with worn pockets and frayed elbows, though it wrapped him in the warmth of the days when she was still with him. Her death had left him alone in a void, and each step felt heavier than the last. The few people passing by didn't notice his presence. Michael had no home, no money, no family. Just weeks before, he had shared a tiny room with his mother, who fought a relentless illness that drained them in every way. Doctors, debts, sleepless nights. And then, the goodbye. It was swift, merciless, and shattering. The one person who meant stability and love to him had vanished. His mother, his only refuge, was gone, leaving him alone in a world that now seemed to hold nothing for him. The days after her passing were a whirlwind. First, the loneliness and pain. Then, the medical debt reminders, and eventually, the eviction. The landlady of their small room looked at him with pity as she told him he couldn't stay without paying rent. Michael, without a job or resources, packed his few belongings into a bag and left the only place he had called home. Since then, his days had been reduced to an endless walk of hunger and cold, a senseless shuffle that kept him moving only to avoid the paralysis of despair. As he stumbled through the empty streets, his mind returned to memories of life before the tragedy. He remembered his mother, strong and determined, heading to the market each morning to earn just enough for the day. He recalled how, despite their hardships, she always found a way to make him smile, to show him that, even in poverty, there was dignity in their lives. Those small celebrations, those acts of love, and the lessons on resilience seemed now to belong to a distant life. Lost in thought, Michael stopped in front of a modest restaurant. "The Good Flavor," read the sign in simple letters, but the aroma of hot food drifting from inside was enough to make him forget his pain for a moment. He peered through the windows, watching families, friends, and couples savoring hearty plates that seemed like an unreachable dream. A pang of hunger twisted his stomach, and his hand moved to his chest, recalling the feeling of being full, loved, safe. Michael hadn't eaten properly in days, and the hunger made his legs weak and his vision blur. At that moment, the smell of food felt like an invitation, a whisper of hope amid his desolation. He approached the restaurant door with trembling steps, insecurity and shame painted on his face. His cold, nervous hand rested on the door, hesitating. He knew he had no money, but he needed to feel, if only for a moment, that he could regain a shred of dignity. With a final breath of courage, he pushed open the door and entered the restaurant. Inside, the Good Flavor was warm, with a simple but welcoming decor that made one feel at home. The tables were draped in checkered cloths, and a soft light filled the space, highlighting the steam rising from the dishes. Nobody noticed Michael as he crossed the threshold, except for a young waitress named Emma, who looked at him from across the room. She wore a kind expression, and seeing Michael, immediately sensed the sadness and need behind his tired eyes. Michael approached Emma with trembling hands, and a voice cracked with shame. He whispered his situation, struggling to meet her gaze. His voice was a faint, helpless plea, asking for a glimmer of compassion, a trace of humanity. Hearing his words, Emma felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to help him, offer a hot meal, tell him he wasn't alone. But before she could react, a shadow appeared behind her. Mr. Ernest, the restaurant's manager. Mr. Ernest was a man with a hardened face and cold eyes, used to looking down on others. He scanned Michael from head to toe, his expression filled with clear disdain, showing he had no intention of helping. He cut into the moment, addressing Michael in a loud, disdainful voice. "What do you want here?" he asked, his tone challenging. "This isn't a place for freeloaders looking to live off others." Michael tried to explain, but Mr. Ernest's words sliced through him like a knife. Every word of contempt, every accusation of being a lazy person who just wanted sympathy, struck blows to his already shattered dignity. Shame and humiliation washed over him as he felt the gaze of some patrons land on him with a mix of discomfort and pity. In a final act of cruelty, Mr. Ernest ordered Emma to escort him out. Caught between her duty and her compassion, Emma complied, guiding him to the door with a look of sadness and silent apology. Michael left with his face flushed, his heart broken, feeling invisible, as if his suffering didn't matter to anyone. Back on the street, the cold night enveloped him once more. He walked aimlessly, dragging his feet along the pavement. Mr. Ernest's words echoed in his mind, eroding what little remained of his self-esteem. In that moment, he felt he had reached the depths of despair. The cold and hunger tore at him, but what hurt most was the indifference of those around him, the cruel confirmation that, to the world, he was just a passing shadow. With eyes blurred by tears of helplessness, Michael kept walking, unaware that, at that precise moment, an anonymous figure was watching him from afar, and that destiny still held a spark of hope amid his darkest night. Michael found himself outside the Good Flavor, the echo of Mr. Ernest's words still ringing in his mind. The night's chill seeped into his bones, and the emptiness in his stomach reminded him of his frailty. Somehow, he found himself turning back and re-entering the restaurant. He didn't want to give up, despite the humiliation, and the aroma of hot food still called to him as a promise of comfort. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and lively. The laughter and chatter of the patrons seemed a cruel mockery to his own silence, but Michael gathered the last fragments of dignity he had left and approached the corner where Emma, the kind-looking waitress, was serving a table. Emma, busy at work, barely had time to react to his return. Something in her gaze said she understood. She not only saw his misery, but in some way shared his pain. Michael tried to find words, but his voice broke before he could finish the sentence. Yet Emma understood what he was trying to say. Her face showed understanding, and for a brief moment, Michael felt less invisible, as if someone truly saw him even in the depths of his despair. But the scene changed in an instant. Before Emma could respond, the imposing figure of Mr. Ernest loomed behind her like a lurking shadow. Tall and with a stern expression, Mr. Ernest had witnessed the situation and decided to intervene with cold satisfaction. The manager's eyes radiated contempt as he sized up Michael, noting his worn clothes and defeated posture. With a voice dripping with sarcasm, he began to speak, making no effort to hide his disdain. "Do you really think you can come in here and ask for something for free?" he said, raising his voice to ensure everyone heard. "This isn't a shelter for freeloaders with nothing better to do. Do you know what we do here? We work. Something you clearly don't understand." Michael felt a knot tighten in his throat. The patron's eyes turned toward him, curious, some uncomfortable, but no one stepped in. Humiliation overtook him like a wave, robbing him of breath. He knew he had no way to defend himself. The shame of his situation was as evident as the dirt on his clothes and the dark circles under his eyes. "Out of my restaurant!" yelled Mr. Ernest, pointing at the door with an authoritative gesture. "You have no business here unless you have money." Emma watched the scene, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and helplessness. She wanted to intervene, to defend him, but she knew Mr. Ernest would not tolerate any act of defiance. Aware that any compassion might cost her the job she desperately needed, she resigned herself to following her boss's orders. With a look full of apology and sadness, she approached Michael, whispering a brief, "I'm sorry," as she guided him to the exit. Michael left the restaurant once again, this time with his heart shattered and his dignity in tatters. Outside, the cold air struck his face, intensifying the pain of the humiliation he had just endured. He had not only been denied a meal, but condemned and discarded, as if he were a burden on the world. He felt the weight of loneliness like never before, as if that closed door symbolized all the doors that would be shut to him from then on. With unsteady steps, he began to walk away from the good flavor, struggling to hold back the tears that burned in his chest. Mr. Ernest's words kept echoing in his mind, each insult and disdainful look stabbing into his heart. The image of the customers' faces, watching the scene without intervening, made him feel more alone than ever. He didn't exist for them. His misery was merely an inconvenience, an interruption in their comfortable, well-fed lives. He walked aimlessly, his eyes clouded by tears he could no longer contain. The city, indifferent, continued its rhythm, and Michael felt like a shadow wandering through the alleys and distant lights. However, he was unaware that Emma, unable to ignore what had happened, was following him from the corner of the restaurant. Tormented by guilt and sadness, she had decided to act silently, making a choice that would forever change Michael's life. As he drifted away into the darkness, Emma quickly returned inside the restaurant. Taking advantage of a moment when Mr. Ernest was distracted, she prepared a small package with some food, wrapping it carefully and hiding it under her apron. Moving quickly and discreetly, she left the restaurant and began following Michael at a safe distance, ensuring she wouldn't frighten or draw attention to herself. She found him at a nearby park, where he had sat on a bench, lost in thought. Emma seized the opportunity when he seemed deep in thought to leave the package on another bench a few steps away. Heart pounding, she retreated quietly, hoping with all her might that he would find it and that this small gesture would bring him a moment of relief. Michael, wrapped in his thoughts, noticed the package just as he was about to stand up. He picked it up with trembling hands, not knowing who had left it or why, but in that moment he felt a mix of astonishment and gratitude that sparked a glimmer of hope. As he held the package, he felt that someone, silently, had seen his suffering and decided to help him. That act of kindness, small as it was, made him feel less alone in a world that had until then seemed to have forgotten him. In that instant, Michael promised himself he would find a way to move forward. He clung to that spark of kindness like a charm, reminding himself that not all was lost, that even in a cruel world, there were those willing to lend a hand in the darkest moments. The night was cold and silent as Michael, with trembling hands and an empty stomach, opened the food package Emma had secretly left on the bench. He could hardly believe that someone, amid such indifference, had thought of him, and more so, had risked their own safety to help him. Inside was a piece of fresh bread, a bit of rice and beans, and a bottle of water. It was simple, but to Michael, it was a true feast. With each bite, he felt a wave of gratitude that momentarily washed away the bitter taste of the humiliation he had endured. As he ate, he looked around, hoping to spot his mysterious benefactor, but there was no trace of anyone. A part of him wished he could thank whoever had extended this invisible hand. It was a small act, but to him it meant everything. Suddenly the world no longer seemed so cruel, and his loneliness felt a bit lighter. The warmth of the food brought back memories of the days when his mother prepared simple dishes with love, and for an instant, his despair transformed into gratitude. Meanwhile, back in the good flavor, Emma couldn't shake Michael's image from her mind. She recalled the shame and despair on his face when Mr. Ernest threw him out, and how he had bowed his head, bearing the weight of every insult without defense. She felt a deep pang of empathy, born from her own experience with suffering and injustice. She knew all too well what it felt like to be trapped and invisible, and in a way, Michael reminded her of herself in a certain time of her life. As she continued her shift, Emma couldn't stop thinking about him, wondering if he had found the food package and if that small gesture had meant something to him. She knew that what she had done was risky, but there was something inside her that wouldn't allow her to stand by while another human being suffered like that. Her job at the Good Flavor was all that allowed her to support her son, Matthew, and she couldn't afford to lose it. But that night, She didn't regret risking everything to help a complete stranger. Michael, for his part, finished the food slowly, savoring each bite as if it were an act of restoration. His mind, cleared by the simple act of eating, allowed him to think of the future, even if only for a few minutes. He remembered his mother's words, who would always tell him that life was hard, but that one had to keep dignity and hope under any circumstance. That night, sitting on that bench, he felt that his mother's promise was alive in that anonymous act of kindness, a reminder that even amid darkness, there was the possibility of finding light. The spark of hope ignited in his heart made him reflect on his life. He promised himself that someday, when his situation improved, he would find a way to return that act of generosity to others who, like him, lived in the shadows of oblivion. He felt a debt toward this unknown person, and he vowed he wouldn't give up, that he would keep going despite everything. That night, Michael slept in the park, his body covered by his old jacket and his stomach slightly full for the first time in days. Before falling asleep, he imagined a future in which he could help others, where doors would open for those who, like him, needed a bit of compassion to keep going. That thought was the last that crossed his mind before exhaustion overtook him. At dawn, Michael woke with the first rays of sunlight, and though his body was still sore and his situation just as uncertain, he felt a strange peace, a renewed drive to face the day. Not knowing what the future held, he got up and decided he would keep walking, looking for something, anything, that might once again give his life meaning. Meanwhile, Emma arrived early for her shift at the Good Flavor, trying to hide the exhaustion and worry that had plagued her since the previous night. She knew that helping Michael had been a high risk, and that if Mr. Ernest discovered her act of compassion, she could lose her job. Yet inside, she felt the satisfaction of having followed her heart. Even if she never saw him again, she had given the best of herself to someone who needed it. And so, as Michael and Emma continued their separate paths, unaware, that simple act of kindness had woven an invisible bond between them, a bond of compassion and resilience, a spark that, in their vastly different yet challenging lives, would begin to transform their worlds and lead them to discover that, even in the darkest moments, there is always a small light of hope. Days passed in the same monotonous chain of hunger and exhaustion for Michael, who kept wandering aimlessly through the city. With winter at its peak, the cold seemed to seep into his bones, and each night on the street became a test of endurance for both his body and spirit. He had learned not to expect anything from anyone, to move without making a sound, almost like a spectre passing through the streets under the cover of darkness. One day, while seeking shelter in the back alley of a mechanic's workshop, Michael slumped against a few wooden crates, overcome by exhaustion, and closed his eyes for a moment. He was worn out, his head drooping to his chest, when he heard footsteps approaching. With his heart pounding, he opened his eyes and saw an older man, robust and serious-looking, watching him from the workshop's entrance. His hands, calloused and covered in small scars, revealed a life of hard work, and his face was lined with wrinkles that seemed to have been earned from each day of toil and sun. "What are you doing here, kid?" asked the man, his voice gruff but not threatening, more curious than anything. Michael lowered his gaze, too ashamed to respond immediately. He didn't want to cause trouble. He just needed a place to rest for a bit and escape the cold. But the man, seeing Michael's thin frame and the sadness that seemed to surround him, insisted in a softer tone. "You don't have to hide. If you need a place to rest or a bit of food, come inside." Michael looked at him in surprise, unsure if he should trust him. But the sincerity in the man's eyes reassured him in some way. Without a word, he accepted the invitation and stepped into the small workshop. The air was filled with the smell of oil and metal, and tools hung meticulously on a wall. There was a small workbench cluttered with car parts and replacements, and in the corner, an old stove gave off a pleasant warmth that brought feeling back to his hands and face. The man introduced himself as Mr. Paul, the owner and sole worker of the shop. In time, Michael would learn that this rugged yet compassionate man had dedicated years to mechanics and that the workshop was his refuge, his personal space, built with effort and patience. Mr. Paul didn't ask many questions, and although he had a piercing look that seemed to see beyond appearances, he respected Michael's silence. With the calm of someone who has lived and seen much, he offered him some bread and a bowl of hot soup. As Michael ate in silence, he felt that the warmth of the food was restoring more than just his energy. It settled a strange peace in his chest, as if he were finally in a safe place, even if only for a moment. "Do you know anything about mechanics, son?" Mr. Paul asked after a while, with a slight smile. Michael shook his head, embarrassed. "No matter," said the mechanic with a shrug. "We all start somewhere. If you're willing to learn, you can stay here for a while and help me around the shop. I'm getting a bit old, and young hands are always helpful." Mr. Paul's offer took Michael by surprise. He couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him anything without expecting something in return. It was as if this shop was a hidden refuge, a small bubble of kindness in the midst of the city's indifference. He accepted the offer with gratitude, not knowing that this moment would mark the beginning of a profound change in his life. Over the following days, Michael began to learn the trade. At first, his shaky, inexperienced hands struggled with the tools, but Mr. Paul, with unusual patience, taught him at his own pace, never rushing him. The old mechanic was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his words carried a wisdom and humility that Michael had never experienced before. Each day, besides teaching him about engines and parts, he shared life lessons, wisdom gained from years of hard work and experience. "Life won't always treat you kindly, Michael," he said one day while adjusting a part. "But as long as you keep your dignity and respect, you'll find a way forward. Remember, true worth isn't in what you own, but in what you do for others." Michael absorbed every word, every gesture, and in his mind, ideas and dreams he had long abandoned began to take shape. In the shop, he found more than just a place to work. He found a way to restore the dignity and purpose he thought he had lost. Days passed, and little by little, his body grew stronger, his hands more steady and skilled, and his heart, once sunken in pain, began to fill with gratitude and hope. Mr. Paul was teaching him more than a trade. He was guiding him toward a new life. Over time, their relationship grew deeper, almost like that of a father and son. Mr. Paul never asked about his past, but through each conversation, Michael could sense that he too understood pain and loss, that he knew what it was like to struggle when everything seemed to fall apart. With a moved heart, Michael found in Mr. Paul the father figure he had never had. One evening after closing up, Mr. Paul offered him a small room at the back of the workshop. It was modest, with a bed and a couple of old pieces of furniture, but to Michael, it was more than he had had in months. He accepted the offer gratefully, unable to find the words to express his thanks. That night, for the first time since his mother passed, he slept under a safe roof, surrounded by the warmth of a home, even if it was borrowed. Each night, as the workshop grew silent, Michael remembered the promise he made to himself when he found that food package in the park. He knew that one day, somehow, he would find a way to give back all the good he was receiving. Thanks to Mr. Paul and his generosity, he had begun to glimpse a future that once seemed impossible. In his mind, a dream began to take shape, one he didn't yet fully understand, but that filled him with a renewed purpose. And so, among engines and tools, between mechanical lessons and life teachings, Michael began to rebuild his existence. He didn't know how long he would stay at the shop or what the future held for him, but now he felt he had a reason to keep going. Mr. Paul's kindness, like that of the stranger who left him food in the park, convinced him that, even though life could be harsh and unforgiving, there was always a glimmer of hope for those willing to get up and keep fighting. Meanwhile, Emma's days at the Good Flavor seemed endlessly long and exhausting. Despite her fatigue, she knew she couldn't afford to falter, not when her son Matthew's health depended on her. At just 24, She had been set on a path of constant struggle. She worked long hours at the restaurant, serving tables, enduring Mr. Ernest's humiliations, and doing everything possible to mask her own despair under a veil of kindness and professionalism. The memory of Michael's look that night, when she had helped him secretly, continued to linger in her mind. She knew well what it was like to feel the world turn its back on you, and if she had learned anything from her own suffering, it was that sometimes a small act of compassion could mean the difference between giving up and pressing on. However, helping Michael had not been a consequence-free impulse. Since that day, Emma lived with the constant tension that Mr. Ernest might discover her act. If he caught her helping someone in secret, it could cost her job. Her situation with her boss was unbearable. Mr. Ernest was a manipulative and ruthless man who viewed Emma as a tool he could exploit as he pleased. He kept her in a constant state of vulnerability, using her situation to impose endless shifts and deny any improvement in her working conditions. More than once, he had made it clear that her job depended on her willingness to cooperate, and that, in a place where employees were easily replaceable, Emma should be grateful to have an income. But Emma didn't stay at the restaurant out of gratitude or lack of pride. She did it out of necessity, for the inescapable responsibility she felt toward her young son. Matthew, only 4 years old, had been diagnosed with a medical condition that required constant checkups and expensive treatments. Every penny Emma earned went toward his medicine and the medical consultations that kept Matthew stable. She had learned to measure every expense, to live with the bare minimum so that her son could have everything he needed, even if it meant sacrificing her own well-being. Her family, far from supporting her, had rejected her years before when she became pregnant with Matthew. Raising her son alone was a challenge she faced with courage, but also with profound loneliness. Her mother, a rigid and traditional woman, had not accepted the pregnancy news, and seeing her alone, without a partner's support, she labeled Emma a disgrace to the family. Since then, Emma and Matthew had been a family of two, bound by an unbreakable bond of love and a series of silent sacrifices. Every morning, as she said goodbye to Matthew, she offered him a smile full of tenderness and promised she would be back soon. In her heart, she knew her son was the reason she endured every humiliation, every insult, and every abuse from Mr. Ernest. Matthew represented her hope and her reason not to give up. Despite his young age, the boy understood that his mother worked hard and always welcomed her with a smile that, for Emma, was her only comfort at the end of a long, exhausting day. Days at the restaurant grew increasingly difficult. The pressure on Emma mounted as the Good Flavors clientele began to dwindle, especially with the arrival of a new restaurant nearby, La Cocina de Don José. Mr. Ernest, unable to adapt to the competition, took out his frustration on Emma and the rest of the staff, blaming them for the loss of customers. The workday became a succession of authoritarian commands, threats of dismissal, and cuts in benefits. Breaks grew shorter, and any mistake, no matter how small, was met with harsh punishment. Emma, exhausted and constantly fearful of losing her only income, felt each day was a test of endurance. Her health and spirit began to break under the strain, yet she always found a way to pick herself back up, knowing her son awaited her at the end of the day. The other employees respected her in silence, admiring her strength and kindness. They knew Emma stayed at the restaurant at the cost of her own dignity, but no one had the power or courage to stand up to Mr. Ernest on her behalf. Despite everything, Emma maintained her essence, that kindness she had kept intact despite adversity. When no one was looking, she offered words of encouragement to those who needed it, secretly helped other employees dealing with personal issues, and, when possible, continued her small acts of generosity towards strangers. Helping Michael had been one of those acts, a way of remembering that despite life's harshness, love and compassion could make a difference. One night, after finishing her shift, Emma walked home exhausted, with aching feet and a heavy heart. Mr. Ernest's harsh words and disdainful looks echoed in her mind, but the thought of Matthew, waiting for her with a smile and an embrace, helped her endure it all. When she opened the door to her small apartment, her son ran to her with open arms, filling her with a pure love that, for a few moments, erased all the pain and anguish. To Matthew, his mother was his whole world, and that look of tenderness reminded Emma why she fought day after day. That night, as Matthew slept, Emma sat by his bed, watching his peaceful, carefree face. Her young son didn't know the extent of the difficulties they faced, and that was what pushed her to keep going. In the silence of the night, Emma made herself a promise. No matter what happened, she would do whatever it took to give Matthew a better life. She knew she couldn't afford to dream big, but she also knew that as long as her son was safe, any sacrifice would be worth it. The unconditional love she felt for her son was her engine, her reason to endure each injustice and every endless day at the good flavor. Though her heart was weary and her body exhausted, Emma's sacrifice was an act of pure and silent love, a strength that sustained her when everything else seemed to fail. Her struggle, though invisible to the world, was a testament to her courage and the infinite capacity of a mother to protect her child, even at the cost of herself. Emma didn't know what the future held, or how much longer she could bear the weight of her reality, but deep down, she kept a spark of hope. She believed that someday, somehow, things would improve, and that her sacrifices wouldn't be in vain. That hope, fragile and distant though it was, kept her going. Because even though the world could be cruel and unjust, Emma was willing to keep fighting, knowing that sometimes the greatest strength emerges from the hearts that have suffered the most. Meanwhile, Michael's days at Mr. Paul's workshop turned into a comforting and structured routine. Among disassembled engines, wrenches, and scattered spare parts, Michael discovered an unexpected passion, the work of mechanics and the satisfaction of fixing what was broken. His hands, once shaky and frail, had now grown strong, moving with increasing skill under Mr. Paul's patient guidance. Still, while the work in the shop provided stability, Michael felt something inside him yearning for a way to make a bigger impact. Nights in the small room at the back of the shop became moments of reflection, times when he recalled his youthful years before the tragedy, when he dreamt of a better future alongside his mother. Those dreams had been buried with her death, but now, slowly, a new vision began to take shape. Inspired by Mr. Paul's daily lessons and the memory of the kindness he had received in his darkest hour, Michael began to wonder if there was a way to give back to the world all that he had received. He had found refuge in others' generosity, and although he knew the road wouldn't be easy, he felt a strong drive to build something of his own, something that could change others' lives just as his had been transformed. One of those nights, as he watched the moon's reflection through the window, an idea started to form in his mind. He thought about the days he went hungry, the cold nights on the streets, and the anonymous food someone had left him in the park. He wanted to create a place where people like him could find not only food, but also dignity and respect. A place that wouldn't judge the neediest, but would give them a chance to rebuild their lives. And so the dream of opening a restaurant was born in his mind. But it wouldn't be just any restaurant. It would offer a solidarity plate system, an idea that would allow customers who could afford it to pay for an extra meal meant for those who couldn't cover it themselves. His inspiration came not only from his experiences, but also from Mr. Paul's teachings, who had instilled in him the belief that a person's worth isn't in what they own, but in what they can do for others. The next morning, while they were working in the shop, Michael shared his thoughts with Mr. Paul. At first, he spoke timidly, fearing the idea might seem far-fetched or unattainable. But Mr. Paul, with his usual calm and wisdom, listened to every word carefully and nodded with a slight smile. "It's a good dream, Michael," he said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't often hear ideas that are born out of gratitude and the desire to help others. If that's your goal, then you have to pursue it, even if it takes time." Mr. Paul's words sparked even more desire in Michael to achieve his goal. In the following months, he continued working tirelessly in the shop, saving every coin he could. His relationship with Mr. Paul had evolved, and the mechanic, seeing him as a son, encouraged him to keep going, guiding him not only in work, but in life. Determined not to let his dream die, Michael started studying accounting and management in his spare time. At first, the numbers and concepts felt confusing and foreign, but his determination to learn what he needed to build his own restaurant gave him the strength to keep going. At night, in the small room he had turned into his refuge, he stayed up late, reading, taking notes, and planning what would one day become a reality. The routine of work and study was exhausting, but filled Michael with a deep satisfaction. For the first time in years, he felt his life had a clear purpose, and that each day brought him one step closer to building something meaningful. The thought of creating a place like the one he had once needed gave him hope and renewed his sense of belonging in the world. Whenever he felt discouraged, he remembered the faces of people who, like him, might find comfort in his restaurant, and that drove him not to give up. One day, Mr. Paul found him going over accounting books in the shop, surrounded by spare parts and tools. Embarrassed, Michael apologized for taking up workspace, but Mr. Paul smiled and said, "This workshop is yours too, Michael, and that table," he said, gesturing to the workbench cluttered with books, "is also for your dreams. Never forget that." Mr. Paul's words stayed in Michael's mind. His mentor had not only provided him with a roof and a job, he had also given him the emotional support he needed to believe in himself and his goals. In the workshop, Michael was learning much more than mechanics. He was absorbing the values of principle, compassion, and perseverance. Over time, Michael began sharing his dream with a few trusted people, and slowly, his words stirred interest and curiosity. He didn't yet have the means to begin, but his passion for helping others was evident, and some of the shop's customers started supporting his cause, offering encouragement and small donations. With each coin saved, he felt one step closer to seeing his vision become a reality. Every time Michael passed crowded restaurants or saw homeless people on the streets, his purpose grew stronger. He knew his dream wasn't just for himself, it was for everyone who, like him, once felt the world had left them behind. Life had taught him that sometimes the best opportunities arose from the darkest places, and his mission was to create a space where people could find a second chance. So, Michael continued his routine of work and study, always supported by Mr. Paul's patience and kindness. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but each day he felt closer to building the restaurant of his dreams. His life had changed course, and with every part he repaired and every lesson he learned, he grew more convinced that someday the new hope would become a reality, a place where all would be welcome, regardless of their circumstances. That dream, born from desperation and gratitude, became his greatest source of motivation, and even though the future remained uncertain, Michael was determined to keep going. For Emma, the days at the Good Flavor grew increasingly tense and exhausting. The decline in business was evident, and Mr. Ernest, rather than taking responsibility to improve the restaurant, chose to blame his employees for the lack of customers. Emma, who worked tirelessly to keep her position and support her son, became one of his main targets. Mr. Ernest's criticisms and hurtful remarks had become a humiliating routine that tested her resilience and dignity day after day. The workdays were grueling, and Mr. Ernest's demands seemed endless. Emma felt trapped in an abusive cycle she couldn't escape. Alongside the long hours, her breaks grew shorter, and any mistake, no matter how minor, became an excuse for him to remind her of her incompetence and luck at still having a job. Mr. Ernest knew Emma couldn't afford to lose her job, and he used her vulnerability to keep her in a state of constant submission. Yet Emma maintained her composure. Her life was a silent battle in which each gesture, forced smile, and act of obedience was a strategy to protect the only means of survival she had for herself and her son. She reminded herself daily that she endured the situation for Matthew. Her son's needs pushed her to bear the abuse, and although the pain and exhaustion were visible on her face, she pressed on. In her few moments of respite, when she managed to escape Mr. Ernest's watchful eye, Emma allowed herself a moment to catch her breath and remember her purpose. She thought of Matthew, who was her only source of joy and strength. Her child awaited her each night with a loving smile, unaware of the hardships his mother endured. Emma always managed to smile back, hiding her fatigue and the weight of her reality behind a kind expression. Yet, Mr. Ernest's pressure only seemed to increase each day. With La Cocina de Don José's success, Mr. Ernest grew more irritable, taking his frustrations out on the employees. Instead of improving the quality of the food or service, he implemented stricter rules for the staff, reducing benefits and cutting break times, as if this could solve the problem. For Emma, the situation became unbearable, and although her body and spirit longed for a break, her responsibility toward Matthew forced her to stay strong. Inside, Emma suffered in silence. She felt that exhaustion was consuming her bit by bit, and that her life had been reduced to an endless cycle of sacrifices. Despite everything, she refused to lose hope. She continued to find ways to help others in secret, even if it could put her job at risk. She knew that risking herself for someone else was a way of affirming her own dignity, a reminder that, even in the face of severe oppression, she still held the power to choose compassion over complete submission. The memory of Michael, the young man she had secretly helped, would return to her mind from time to time. In her hardest moments, when she felt she could no longer endure the injustices, Emma thought of that small act of kindness and how, despite her own hardships, she had made a difference in someone else's life. That thought gave her strength, reminding her that her humanity was intact and that although Mr. Ernest tried to belittle her, she remained the owner of her own kindness and empathy. One night, upon returning home, she found Matthew waiting for her with a small letter he had written in his attempt to learn to write. With crooked letters and colorful drawings, Matthew had made a card expressing how much he loved her and how one day he too would work hard to help her. Emma, moved to tears, hugged her son, feeling that every sacrifice was worth it if it gave Matthew a future. That letter, such an innocent and loving gesture, became her amulet, something she would hold in her heart each time she felt she couldn't go on. The next day, she returned to the good flavor with her head held high and a renewed determination. Mr. Ernest continued his disdainful attitude and hurtful words, but Emma, without him knowing, had found an inner strength that exceeded his power over her. Her life at the restaurant was only one part of her reality, one she endured for her son's well-being. Her true purpose, her true fight, was to protect and give her best to Matthew. As the days passed, Emma began to plan a way to save a bit of money, putting aside small sums that would one day allow her to break free from Mr. Ernest's oppression and start anew. She knew it would be a long, difficult road, but driven by her love for her son and the desire for a dignified life, she was determined to find a way out. Thus, even though her reality remained harsh and suffocating, Emma kept hope alive in her heart. In every smile she gave Matthew, every word of encouragement she shared with other employees, and every day she endured Mr. Ernest's abuse, she reaffirmed her commitment to life and her dignity. She knew that one day her efforts and sacrifices would bear fruit, and Matthew would grow up seeing a mother who, despite all the hardships, never surrendered her humanity or her love for him. That day, Emma understood that her daily battle was not just about survival, it was about protecting and shaping the hope for a better future, one in which both she and Matthew could live with freedom and dignity. Michael had been working tirelessly at Mr. Paul's workshop for several years, saving every penny he could and studying in his free time. Learning accounting and management had been a challenge, but his determination to see his dream come true was stronger than any obstacle. The idea of creating a restaurant that offered dignity and support to those in need had become the center of his life, his purpose, and his greatest inspiration. Over time, Michael had earned the trust and respect of the community. Customers who visited Mr. Paul's workshop not only knew him as the kind young mechanic, but also as someone willing to help others. Conversations about his vision of a solidarity-based restaurant spread, and people began making small donations and offering their support, encouraging him to keep going. Mr. Paul, proud of him, also contributed what he could from his savings, assuring him that, though it was little, his wishes to see him succeed were immense. After years of saving, effort, and planning, Michael was finally ready to take the big step. He had found a small location in a busy part of the city, modest, but with enough potential to become the welcoming space he had always imagined. With the help of Mr. Paul and some community members who believed in his cause, he cleaned, painted, and prepared the place, filling every corner with the hope that had sustained him for so long. On the day of the grand opening, Michael was nervous but filled with excitement. He had decided to name the restaurant The New Hope, a name that symbolized not only his own story of overcoming hardship, but also the promise of refuge for those who, like him, had hit rock bottom at some point in their lives. He knew that, although his restaurant wouldn't solve all the city's problems, it could offer a space of comfort and kindness for those seeking a second chance. The New Hope was more than just a restaurant. It was a place where people found solidarity and respect. On a chalkboard near the entrance, Michael wrote a phrase that captured the essence of the place. Here, everyone is welcome. He also included a small message explaining the solidarity plate system, where customers could make an extra donation to cover the meal of someone in need. The idea was inspired by the times he had relied on others' generosity, and now he wanted those who visited the New Hope to experience the same kind of help that had once changed his life. From day one, the New Hope was filled with people from all walks of life, drawn not only by the food, but by the message of compassion and respect that permeated every corner of the place. Families, workers, people experiencing homelessness, all found a space where they could eat in peace, without fear of judgment. Michael moved from table to table, serving plates and sharing words of encouragement, treating every customer like a friend, an equal. To him, there were no distinctions. Everyone who crossed the threshold of the New Hope was welcomed with the warmth he himself had needed at his lowest. The community's response was overwhelming. Those who could contribute a solidarity plate did so, and soon the restaurant became a symbol of unity. People began talking about the New Hope, not just as a restaurant, but as a place where kindness and respect were the foundation. Word of this welcoming space spread, drawing people from all over, and the New Hope quickly became a community gathering point. One day, while serving an elderly woman who had lost her family and relied on donations to survive, Michael realized the magnitude of what he had achieved. This restaurant, which had started as an idea in his mind, was now a refuge for the forgotten, a light in the darkness for those who, like him, had once needed a glimmer of hope. Watching the woman's grateful smile, Michael felt a profound peace. He knew he had fulfilled his purpose and that his mother would be proud of what he had built. Each night, as he closed the restaurant, Michael felt immense satisfaction, knowing he was contributing to something greater than himself. He remembered those who had helped him along the way, especially Mr. Paul, his mentor and father figure, who had guided and supported him at every step. Mr. Paul continued to visit the restaurant often, sitting in a corner and proudly watching what his son had achieved. His presence served as a constant reminder of the humility and generosity Michael had learned from him. As time passed, the New Hope began to gain recognition. The concept of a solidarity restaurant attracted the attention of local media and community organizations interested in supporting the cause. But for Michael, true success was not in fame or popularity. It was in the people he could help, the lives he could touch with each plate served, each kind word, and each respectful gesture toward those who walked through the door. At night, when the restaurant emptied and silence returned, Michael would take a moment to reflect on all he had been through, the nights spent on the street, the sacrifices, and the years of work that had brought him to this point. In his heart, he felt that this space was more than just a restaurant. It was an extension of the kindness he had received, a tribute to human resilience and second chances. Then, one night, as he was about to close the restaurant, Michael received an unexpected visit. A familiar figure appeared at the door. Mary, the homeless woman who had given him her first coins when he was on the streets. That small gesture of generosity had been the first glimmer of hope he'd received in his darkest moment, and now she was there, in his restaurant. Moved, Michael invited her to sit down and served her a special dinner, thanking her silently for that act, which, unbeknownst to her, had been the beginning of everything. Sitting beside Mary, Michael understood that his life had come full circle, that the pain and struggle he had endured had not been in vain. The new hope was not just his dream come true, but also a testament to the fact that kindness always finds its way back, and that even in the darkest moments, there is always a light waiting for us at the end of the path. As the new hope flourished and became a symbol of generosity in the community, the Good Flavor, the restaurant where Michael had been humiliated, began to show signs of decline. People in the neighborhood talked about how the place had lost customers as other restaurants, emphasizing respect for their employees and friendly service, rose in popularity. La Cocina de Don José, for instance, had quickly gained a following thanks to its warm atmosphere and community-focused approach, creating an environment where everyone felt welcome. Mr. Ernest, the manager of the Good Flavor, couldn't understand why customers preferred other places, and his response to the decline was to tighten his rules and take out his frustration on his employees. Emma and her colleagues bore the brunt of his inflexibility and the lack of compassion that defined the restaurant's atmosphere. Each day the pressure increased, and Mr. Ernest's words grew sharper and more authoritarian. In his mind, the employees were to blame for the drop in sales, and any error, no matter how small, warranted a humiliating reprimand. Emma, who continued in her position, felt that the situation was becoming increasingly unbearable. She knew that the Good Flavor was losing customers, and that meanwhile, her working conditions were only worsening. Despite the constant abuse, she kept working to ensure her son Matthew's well-being. Her promise to give him a better life was her only motivation to endure Mr. Ernest's mistreatment, though in her heart, she felt a deep sadness watching her life consumed in such an oppressive place. The situation became critical when, one day, Mr. Ernest called a meeting with all the staff. With a hardened face and eyes full of resentment, he addressed the employees in a dry, scornful tone. He announced that due to some employees' inefficiency, he would be forced to cut their wages and benefits until the restaurant's situation improved. The employees exchanged glances of disbelief and concern. They knew that the decline was not due to their performance, but to their boss's lack of vision and empathy. But none dared to confront him. With a heavy heart, Emma felt her strength begin to wane. That meeting confirmed that, to Mr. Ernest, they were nothing more than expendable pieces in his business, and that he had no interest in improving conditions for the place or those who worked there. She knew quitting wasn't an option. The need to care for her son and the lack of opportunities in the city kept her trapped in that job, even as she watched the Good Flavor teeter on the edge of collapse. Meanwhile, Michael, focused on his own restaurant, had heard rumors about the Good Flavor's troubles. He knew that Mr. Ernest's business was in decline, and he couldn't help but recall the day he was publicly humiliated there. However, time and the transformation of his life had helped him see the past with less resentment and more as a series of lessons that had led him to where he was. Although he might have felt satisfaction at seeing the place fall, instead, he felt a strange compassion for the employees who, like him once, suffered under Mr. Ernest's coldness. A few days after hearing the rumors, Michael received unexpected news. The Good Flavor was officially up for sale. Unable to cope with financial losses, Mr. Ernest had decided to sell the restaurant, and the neighborhood was already buzzing with talk of an upcoming auction to salvage what little remained of the business. Upon hearing the news, Michael felt a mix of emotions. He knew this could be a unique opportunity, not only to acquire the place where he had faced his lowest moment, but to transform it into something entirely different. After careful consideration and consultation with Mr. Paul, who remained his mentor and advisor, Michael decided to participate in the auction. He kept his plan a secret, especially because he knew his intentions were not purely commercial. He wanted to change the essence of that place, making it an extension of the New Hope, a space that honored the values of dignity and respect, not only for customers, but also for those who worked there. The auction was a quiet event, with a few interested buyers. Guided by the determination that had brought him this far, Michael attended, and after a brief but intense bidding session, he won ownership of the good flavor. He looked at the place with a gaze of nostalgia and hope, remembering the humiliation he once endured there, and feeling that now he held the chance to turn that pain into something positive, to transform the space into one where kindness and respect would prevail above all. However, he chose to keep his identity as the new owner a secret, at least until everything was ready for the change. He knew that, for the employees, it would be hard to understand his intentions after so many years under Mr. Ernest's oppression. He planned to announce it at the right time, when he could offer them a clear vision of the change he intended to bring into their lives. In the weeks that followed, Michael invested time and effort into planning the transformation of the good flavor. He reached out to architects, designers, and trusted individuals to give the place a fresh look, one that reflected the philosophy of the New Hope. His goal was simple but profound. He wanted customers and employees alike to feel, upon entering, that this restaurant was a place of kindness, where no one would be humiliated or looked down upon, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. While overseeing the renovation plans, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Emma, the waitress who had witnessed his humiliation years ago, and who, unknowingly, had shown him his first act of kindness. He remembered the look of compassion on her face, and how, despite the harshness of her life, she had found a way to help him in secret. Now, he knew she was still working there, and was likely one of those most affected by the restaurant's collapse. He decided that, when the time was right, he would speak to her directly, offering her a dignified position in the new project he was building. He knew that by giving her this opportunity, he would not only be repaying her for the kindness she showed him in his darkest hour, but he would also be ensuring that the restaurant had a leader who embodied the spirit of empathy and compassion he wished to reflect in every corner of the space. With the contract signed and renovation plans underway, Michael prepared for the next chapter of his life. He knew that transforming the good flavor wouldn't be easy, and that he might face resistance from those who still saw the place as a symbol of pain and humiliation. But he was determined to prove that even the darkest past could be turned into a beacon of hope for others. The good flavor was about to be reborn, this time under the direction of someone who deeply understood the value of dignity and compassion. Michael knew he had the chance to transform the story of that place, and with it, the lives of those still struggling in the shadows. For him, this was an opportunity not only for personal redemption, but also to offer others the same refuge and respect he had once been denied. News of the good flavor's sale quickly spread through the neighborhood. To some, it was just a change in ownership, but to others, especially the employees, the uncertainty and fear of losing their jobs loomed large. Emma, who had spent years working under Mr. Ernest's tyranny, watched the activity around the restaurant with a mix of worry and hope. She knew that despite how terrible working under Mr. Ernest had been, her job at the Good Flavor was her only means of maintaining even a minimal stability for herself and her son, Matthew. Michael, meanwhile, had kept a low profile throughout the purchase process, following his plan to transform the place without anyone, not even the employees, knowing he was the new owner. He felt a mix of nostalgia and determination each time he thought of the restaurant, recalling the humiliation he had suffered there years ago, but also the first act of kindness he had received from Emma, who, without knowing him, had given him a spark of hope. The idea of transforming that space and giving it a new purpose filled him with satisfaction, and each day he felt more certain that this was the right decision. With the contract signed and paperwork completed, Michael decided the first step would be a radical change in the Good Flavor's infrastructure and atmosphere. He met with a team of renovators and designers, aiming to transform every corner of the place to erase any trace of its oppressive past. He wanted everyone, customers and employees alike, to feel that the restaurant was a welcoming space where dignity and respect could be felt everywhere. The initial days of remodeling were filled with activity. Workers tackled walls, floors, and furniture, while Michael supervised each detail to ensure the atmosphere aligned with the New Hope's philosophy. He knew this change would also give the employees an opportunity for a fresh start. More than a physical transformation, he wanted the place to represent a space where workers felt valued and respected. Michael had not yet revealed his identity as the new owner, and he intended to do so when the renovations were further along, allowing him to show his complete vision. He decided to talk to the employees first, not only to reassure them, but also to present his plans for the new venture. He knew that, after years of mistreatment and humiliation under Mr. Ernest, the changes could be difficult for them to grasp. Finally, the day came for Michael to introduce himself to the staff. Gathering everyone in the main room, the employees, confused and expectant, sat in front of him, some vaguely remembering him as the young man Mr. Ernest had humiliated years earlier. However, many didn't know who he really was or why he was there. Aware of their confusion, Michael began his presentation with calm sincerity. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, looking around at the employees' faces. "My name is Michael, and I am the new owner of this restaurant, which will soon no longer be the Good Flavor." A murmur swept through the room. Surprise was evident on the faces of those who had worked there for years, and some exchanged looks of disbelief. Emma, sitting at the back of the room, watched him intently. Although her memory of Michael was distant, she recognized the strength in his gaze, the same look she had seen that night when she had silently helped him after he left the restaurant, humiliated. With a mix of curiosity and hope, she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Michael took a deep breath and looked at each of them, recalling that he too had once felt invisible, ignored, and degraded in that very place. Now he had the chance to change things. "I know that for many of you, this place represents a difficult history," he said. "I also know you've endured mistreatment and have worked in conditions that are unworthy of anyone. I want you to know that, under my direction, this will change." Michael explained his vision for the restaurant, which would no longer be called the Good Flavor, but rather an extension of the New Hope, the restaurant he had opened years earlier. He spoke about his goal to create a space where each person, customer or employee, would be treated with dignity and respect. He shared his idea of the solidarity plate system and the community-centered service philosophy he applied at the New Hope. "I want each of you to feel part of this new project," Michael continued. "Here, there will be no insults, no scorn, no humiliation. Each one of you will have the right to work in a fair and safe environment." As they listened, the employees began to grasp the magnitude of the coming change. Some faces, previously marked by weariness and resignation, began to show expressions of relief and enthusiasm. Emma, in particular, felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Michael's promises seemed almost too good to be true, but something in his tone and gaze made her trust him. At the end of the meeting, Michael approached Emma. She, unsure of what to expect, looked at him with a mix of gratitude and emotion. He knew that without her, he might never have found the strength to keep going in his darkest moment, and now he wanted to return the same gesture of generosity she had shown him. "Emma," he said, looking at her with gratitude, "I remember what you did for me that night. I haven't forgotten it." Emma, surprised and moved, nodded. Michael's words confirmed that he was indeed the young man she had secretly helped, the same person who had now returned, not for revenge, but to restore dignity to the place and to those who worked there. "I'd like to offer you a position as manager of the new restaurant," Michael continued, his voice quiet but firm. "I want you to lead this new chapter. I know you've endured a lot, and that your dedication to your son has kept you here. I want to make sure that from now on, you can work in a place where you feel respected and valued." Emma, with tears in her eyes, accepted the offer. The opportunity was more than she had ever dreamed of, and for the first time in years, she felt that her efforts and sacrifices were being recognized. She thanked Michael, her throat tight, unable to express the depth of her gratitude. Over the following weeks, Michael worked side by side with the employees, leading the restaurant's transformation and ensuring that everyone felt part of the change. Walls were painted, furniture was replaced, and the atmosphere, once dark and oppressive, now reflected a sense of renewal and hope. The employees, including Emma in her new role, began to experience the difference of working in a place where kindness and respect were the norms. News of the Good Flavor's transformation spread quickly through the neighborhood. People started calling the restaurant the New Hope, and soon it was filled with those wanting to experience the change Michael had brought. Under his leadership, with Emma as manager, the restaurant became a haven of solidarity, where customers and employees alike found comfort and respect. Thus, the Good Flavor ceased to exist. In its place, the New Hope stood as a symbol of second chances, a testament to the power of kindness and respect in a world where both can sometimes seem scarce. For Michael and all the employees, especially Emma, this place represented not only a fresh start, but also the chance to heal past wounds and build a dignified and hopeful future. With each passing day at the New Hope, Emma felt surrounded by a renewed spirit. Her role as manager not only gave her a stability she had never dreamed of, but made her feel valued and respected for the first time in years. Her life had changed in a way that felt almost surreal. She was no longer just an invisible employee subjected to the whims of a tyrannical boss. Instead, she was a vital part of a place that prioritized everyone's dignity. For Emma, this change had improved her working conditions and restored a part of herself she thought she had lost. Despite months of working together, Emma and Michael hadn't yet had a chance to talk in depth about the past. However, both felt a silent, special bond. Michael saw in Emma an admirable strength and a heart full of kindness, while Emma saw in Michael someone she could trust wholeheartedly, someone who had built the New Hope. Not only as a workplace, but as a refuge. One evening, after a long day's work, Michael asked Emma to join him for dinner in the now renovated restaurant, alive with warmth and energy. The New Hope had been transformed into a bright space where warm colors and simple decor created a cozy atmosphere. As they shared a peaceful dinner, exchanging stories and smiles, Michael felt it was finally time to talk about what they had both lived through in the past. "Emma," Michael began, his tone serious yet gentle, "I want you to know that none of this would have been possible without you. What you did for me that day in the park was more meaningful than you could imagine." Emma looked at him, surprised, as memories of that night flooded back. She clearly remembered the desperation in Michael's eyes when she saw him leave the Good Flavor, humiliated and broken. Her impulse to help him had been so strong that she hadn't hesitated to risk her job to offer him some comfort. Yet, she had never imagined that her gesture would have such a profound impact. "I never told you before, but in my darkest moment, when I felt the world had left me behind, I found that package of food. I didn't know where it came from, but that act reminded me that there were good, compassionate people, and that I wasn't alone," Michael continued, his words filled with sincerity. "It was the first step that helped me believe in a better future and begin this journey that led me here." Emma felt her heart racing. She had never thought something so small could change someone's life so deeply. She herself had spent so many years trapped in a routine of sacrifice and unrecognized work, and hearing that her act of kindness had such a significant impact filled her with gratitude and emotion. I never imagined it would mean so much to you," Emma said with a slight smile. "I did it because I saw in you the pain I felt myself. No one should suffer like that, Michael." They shared a look of understanding, as if all the pieces of their past were finally coming together in a single moment. For Michael, this conversation marked the end of a cycle, confirming that his and Emma's stories were profoundly intertwined. Both had been hurt and marked by life, yet they had found a way to heal and rebuild through mutual kindness and support. Michael, moved, took Emma's hand, a gesture of gratitude for the bond they shared and a promise that they would always be there for each other. Emma felt an indescribable warmth and a peace she hadn't experienced in years, as if all her struggles and sacrifices finally made sense in that moment. As they finished dinner, they walked together to the restaurant's entrance, looking up at the New Hope's sign glowing in the night. Once dark and oppressive, the place had become a symbol of resilience and second chances. For both of them, that sign represented more than just a name. It was a reflection of the transformation they had experienced and proof that life could always offer a new beginning. Before parting, Michael assured Emma that she would always have a safe place at the New Hope for herself and her son Matthew. The stability she had longed for was now a reality, and Michael committed to doing everything he could to ensure both she and her son had a future full of possibilities. With a smile and peace in her heart, Emma said goodbye to Michael that night, knowing that she had finally found in him not just a fair boss, but a true friend and life companion. The following weeks were filled with growth and change at the New Hope. Under Michael's leadership and with Emma as manager, the restaurant had become a warm, welcoming space that attracted both customers and employees. Stories of transformed lives multiplied, and for many, the place had become a refuge where dignity and kindness were present each day. Yet behind this renewed atmosphere lay a dark secret: Emma's past with Mr. Ernest, the former owner of the Good Flavor. Driven to understand Emma more deeply and help her fully heal, Michael began to look into her history. Emma had always been private about her years working for Mr. Ernest, and while Michael respected her silence, he couldn't ignore the pain she still seemed to carry. Through confidential conversations with some of the oldest employees and discreet inquiries in the neighborhood, Michael began to uncover details that filled him with anger and sadness. The rumors spoke of how Mr. Ernest had taken advantage of his position of power over Emma from the start. He had forced her to endure an oppressive work environment and manipulated her constantly, using threats of dismissal to keep her under his control. What Michael discovered left him even more shocked. Matthew, Emma's son, was the result of an abusive, hidden relationship that Mr. Ernest had maintained with her, exploiting her vulnerability when she was just a young woman with no support or resources. The story behind Matthew was heartbreaking. When Emma became pregnant, she had tried to leave the restaurant and escape Mr. Ernest's influence, but he had threatened her, promising to ruin any chance she had of finding another job. Fearing for her future and her child's, Emma had no choice but to remain at the Good Flavor, enduring years of mistreatment and manipulation while fighting to raise Matthew in an environment that made her feel more trapped with each passing day. Michael felt a mix of rage and sorrow as he understood the extent of the suffering Emma had silently endured. The same woman who, in his darkest moment, had found a way to help him without expecting anything in return, had been trapped in a life of sacrifice and humiliation. Now, he held the power to free Emma from that past and reveal the truth she had kept hidden, not out of fear, but out of the need to protect her son and maintain stability. Determined to end this story of abuse and free Emma from the weight of her silence, Michael organized a meeting with the entire staff of the New Hope. He knew this truth needed to be shared, not only to acknowledge Mr. Ernest's dark legacy, but also to ensure Emma received the support and justice she deserved. On the day of the meeting, employees gathered in the restaurant, uncertain of what Michael's announcement would entail. Emma, like the others, stood in the room, a mix of curiosity and nerves at the seriousness on Michael's face. He began his speech by speaking about the importance of transparency and respect, emphasizing that the New Hope was not just a place to serve meals, but a space where every person should feel safe and respected. Today, I want to share a truth with all of you, one that's been hidden in silence for many years, Michael began, looking at each person gathered. A truth that, though painful, must be known. Because this place represents a new beginning for all of us, and for that to be real, we must free ourselves from any shadows that still follow us. The employees exchanged puzzled looks, beginning to sense that Michael was about to reveal something significant. With a firm yet compassionate tone, he continued, "For years, Emma has been one of the strongest, most resilient people I've known. Despite everything she's endured, she has kept her dignity and helped many of us, even in the hardest times. But what many of you may not know is that she has been the victim of unimaginable injustice." With respect and sensitivity, Michael shared Emma's story, recounting the abuse she had endured under Mr. Ernest's control. He explained how Mr. Ernest had manipulated and threatened her, stripping her of her freedom and preventing her from leaving her job. As the employees listened, a heavy silence fell over the room. Some showed signs of anger, while others held back tears as they realized the depth of the suffering Emma had kept hidden for so long. Emma, her face streaked with tears, looked at Michael, surprised and profoundly moved. She had never imagined anyone could know her story so deeply, or even less, have the courage to bring it into the open as an act of justice and recognition. For years, she had carried the weight of her past and the scars of her abuse, but now she felt truly seen for the first time. Someone understood the magnitude of her pain and was willing to grant her the justice she had silently yearned for. Michael, seeing the employees' reactions, approached Emma and offered her his hand. She took it, feeling overwhelmed yet relieved, as if she could finally let go of the weight she had borne in silence. "Emma," Michael said, his voice steady, "I want you to know that you no longer have to bear this pain alone. Here, at the New Hope, you have a family that supports you and values every sacrifice you've made. From this day on, everyone here knows that your story is not a burden, but an example of courage, and that you'll never have to live with fear of judgment or silence again." Deeply moved, the employees began to applaud. The empathy and respect they felt for Emma filled the room, and for the first time in years, she felt that her pain and sacrifices had not been in vain. That applause was more than support. It was an acknowledgement of her struggle and strength, and the confirmation that, in this place, her story and her dignity were valued. Michael, equally moved, embraced Emma, assuring her that the New Hope would provide all the support she needed to heal and rebuild her life. For him, this moment was the true purpose of the restaurant, not merely to offer food, but to create a space where every person could be seen and valued for who they were. The meeting ended with a sense of renewal and unity. The employees, once just co-workers, now felt like family, united by the commitment to care for one another and protect the legacy of the New Hope. For Emma, that day marked the end of a cycle of pain and the beginning of a new chapter in her life, where her story became a symbol of resilience and not a burden. From that day forward, the New Hope was not just a restaurant, it was a space of justice and empathy, where everyone who entered found not only nourishment, but a community that valued truth and dignity. With the revelation of her story and the unanimous support of her colleagues, Emma felt as though a completely new chapter had begun in her life. The weight she had carried for years, the painful memories, and the invisible wounds finally began to heal. At the New Hope, she found not only stability, but a deep peace she had never known. She knew she could work without fear, without the constant threat Mr. Ernest had represented, and without hiding who she truly was. As manager, Emma not only oversaw the restaurant's daily operations, but also worked to foster an atmosphere of support and respect. She ensured that every employee felt valued and heard, just as Michael had done for her. Over time, Emma noticed the changes in her colleagues, who, like her, had spent years working under abusive conditions, but now enjoyed a space where solidarity and kindness prevailed. Seeing Emma's dedication and commitment to her new role filled Michael with pride. He knew that she not only had the knowledge and experience to lead, but also the heart and compassion necessary to uphold the spirit of the new hope. For him, the restaurant had become much more than a mere project. It was proof that pain could be transformed into something positive, and that people, no matter their past wounds, could find a path toward a fulfilling and meaningful life. One afternoon, Michael and Emma were reviewing sales reports and discussing new menu ideas. The restaurant continued to grow in popularity, attracting more customers who came not only for the quality food, but for the warm and welcoming atmosphere defining the new hope. They talked and laughed like friends who had shared not only work, but a story of struggle and redemption. In the middle of their conversation, Michael paused and looked at Emma with gratitude. "Emma, I want you to know how much I value everything you do here. Your dedication, your empathy, your strength," he said softly. "The new hope wouldn't be what it is without you. You've truly made this place a home for all of us." Emma smiled, moved by his words. Every day she felt more grateful to have found in Michael not only a fair boss, but a friend, someone who believed in her and her abilities. She remembered the years she had worked in silence, enduring abuse and sacrificing for her son without any recognition. Now every word of support from Michael confirmed that those dark times were behind her. "Michael, thank you for giving me this opportunity," Emma replied. "Sometimes I think about how much my life has changed since you came. I never imagined I could work in a place where I truly felt respected and where I could make a difference. You made this possible." As they spoke, Emma's son Matthew arrived at the restaurant. Michael had met him several times, and the boy already looked up to him with admiration. Matthew, now 8 years old, gazed at Michael with respect and affection, as if he sensed in his innocent way that this man had transformed his mother's life in profound ways. Michael smiled upon seeing Matthew and motioned for him to come closer. He asked him about school, his hobbies, and his dreams, and Matthew, with the joy and sincerity of a child, talked about his hopes to study and help his mom someday. The relationship that had developed between the three was something special. Michael had become not only a mentor and boss for Emma, but also a figure of support and stability for Matthew, something Emma had wished for her son for years. Over time, Emma's life became more stable. She could now care for Matthew without constantly worrying about debts or the threat of losing her job. She knew her son had a secure future and that at the New Hope, she could work with peace of mind. Every night as she returned home, Emma felt fulfilled and at peace, knowing she was building a dignified life for herself and Matthew. The relationship between Michael and Emma deepened with each passing day. They shared a bond and trust that went beyond the professional. They had both endured the hardest moments of their lives and were now building something that restored their hope. For Emma, Michael was much more than her boss. He was someone she could trust completely, someone who had transformed her life in ways she had never imagined. For Michael, Emma's strength and kindness touched him deeply. Their conversations grew increasingly personal, and they began to share their dreams and aspirations, realizing that beyond being colleagues at the New Hope, they were two people who complemented and understood each other on a profound level. One night, after closing the restaurant, Michael invited Emma and Matthew to dinner at a nearby park. Under the starlit sky and with the gentle sounds of the night around them, they shared laughter, stories, and knowing glances. Michael and Emma realized that beyond the New Hope, their lives had found new meaning and direction. That night, as Matthew ran among the trees, Michael and Emma shared a silent moment where their looks said everything. The past no longer defined them, and for the first time in a long time, the future was full of promise. From that night forward, their relationship became something deeper than friendship. A connection had blossomed between them that went beyond words and shared experiences. In that park, under the starry sky, Michael took Emma's hand, and in a gesture of warmth and respect, she responded with a peaceful smile. For both, this new beginning was a chance to build a family, to create a life where love, compassion, and hope were at the center. The new hope was no longer just their workplace. It was also the symbol of their union, the place where their lives had intertwined to form something beautiful and meaningful. From that moment on, Emma and Michael began to dream together, planning not only the restaurant's growth, but also the future they wanted to build. Each day at The New Hope became an extension of their love and their shared desire to make the world a better place. And with Matthew by their side, they formed a family that, though born from scars and pain, now stood as an example of how kindness and mutual support could turn any hardship into a new beginning filled with promise and happiness. The New Hope had grown and thrived beyond what Michael and Emma could have imagined. What had started as a young man's dream of overcoming his past had become the heart of the community, a place where people found not only a hot meal, but also support, kindness, and a sense of belonging. The story of the restaurant, its mission to offer solidarity plates, and its atmosphere of respect had touched the hearts of everyone in the neighborhood and beyond. Michael and Emma, now united not only as partners in work, but as a couple, worked side by side to expand their vision. Emma's son, Matthew, was also part of this dream. Despite his young age, he felt immense pride watching his mom and Michael work together, and he loved helping in any way he could, whether by cleaning tables or handing out menus with a shy smile. For him, The New Hope wasn't just his mom's restaurant. It was a place where he found family, people who loved and protected him. Michael and Emma's plans extended beyond the walls of the restaurant. Inspired by the impact The New Hope had on the community, they began dreaming of expanding their mission to create more spaces where those in need could find support. They started organizing community activities, from free dinners for the less fortunate to skill-building workshops for their employees, giving them tools useful not only in the restaurant, but also in their personal lives. One of their new initiatives was called Open Kitchens. It invited people experiencing homelessness or hardship to help in the kitchen, where, in return, they received culinary training and a small stipend. Michael wanted everyone to have the chance to learn a skill that could help them build a foundation for the future. Emma, with her kindness and empathy, made sure everyone felt welcome, offering them a safe space to begin rebuilding their lives. The New Hope wasn't just a restaurant, it was a place for second chances. The success of these programs attracted attention from local media and charitable organizations who began collaborating with Michael and Emma to provide more resources and support. Some donations allowed them to improve their facilities and hire more people, many of whom came from challenging backgrounds and found not just a job at The New Hope, but a home. The new employees shared their moving life stories, and everyone was welcomed as part of a big family, united by the desire to overcome hardship and spread goodwill. But not every day was easy. As the restaurant and its programs grew, so did the logistical and financial challenges that Michael and Emma hadn't foreseen. There were times when funds ran low and customer flow fluctuated. Some in the neighborhood even questioned their charitable model, fearing that inviting vulnerable individuals could drive other customers away. But Michael and Emma stood firm in their vision, believing that kindness and solidarity would triumph over any obstacle. During these difficult times, it was the unity among the employees and the unwavering support from the community that kept them going. People who had once received help from them returned to offer a hand. Some brought food, others volunteered to work in the programs, and many loyal customers donated to the solidarity plates to ensure that the restaurant could keep serving meals to those who couldn't afford them. One evening, While Michael and Emma were reviewing finances and planning new activities, Matthew approached them and asked if they would ever open another The New Hope. The idea took them by surprise, but it made them smile. Matthew, with his innocence, had captured the restaurant's spirit and understood the importance of sharing it with more people. Inspired by his question, Michael and Emma began to seriously consider opening a second location in an area where many people were in need. With the support of donors and those committed to their cause, Michael and Emma decided to embark on the journey of opening a second The New Hope. They began looking for the right place, planning how to replicate the model of solidarity and support that defined their first restaurant. They wanted the second location to be an extension of their mission, a place where respect, kindness, and empathy would be felt at every table and in every dish served. As preparations for the new location progressed, they organized a special dinner at the original restaurant, inviting the entire community. That night, The New Hope was adorned with lights and flowers, and every corner radiated the warmth of a home that welcomed everyone. Michael and Emma stood before their employees and the community to share their expansion plans, thanking everyone who had helped make the dream born in Michael's heart during a moment of despair come true. Announcing their plans, Michael recalled his mother's words, which had taught him the importance of dignity and helping others. He shared that The New Hope was more than just a restaurant. It was a tribute to these values, a place where anyone in need could find a helping hand. Employees and customers alike applauded with enthusiasm, many stepping forward to thank them and pledge their support for the new location in any way they could. Emma, standing by his side, looked at Michael with pride and emotion. She knew they had come a long way since those days of struggle and loneliness. At that moment, surrounded by people she considered family, she understood that the pain she had endured had not been in vain. Her story, Michael's, and that of every person in The New Hope, now served as a testament to resilience, a reminder that even the darkest times could be transformed into light and hope. That night, as they watched the guests laugh and share stories, Michael and Emma felt more united than ever. They knew the road ahead would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to change lives and build a community grounded in respect and mutual support. At the end of the night, as they closed the restaurant, Michael and Emma lingered for a moment in silence, watching the lights dim one by one. With a shared look of understanding and affection, they promised to keep working together to bring The New Hope to more places, confident that their mission could transform not only their own lives, but those of everyone they encountered. This promise, exchanged in the quiet of the night, sealed their commitment to continue, carrying hope and kindness wherever they went. Time passed, and The New Hope became much more than a restaurant. It was a symbol of transformation, a refuge where people found not only a meal, but also support, empathy, and opportunities to rebuild their lives. The second location opened with the same mission, drawing in more people and strengthening the support network Michael and Emma had dreamed of creating. Michael and Emma, now inseparable in both life and mission, had built a family filled with love and strength. Matthew, growing older each day, saw in them the example of compassion and hard work. Over the years, he was surrounded by values that taught him the importance of helping others and pursuing one's dreams. Michael had become the father figure Matthew had always wanted, and Emma felt that after years of suffering, life was finally offering her the peace and stability she had long sought. As the anniversary of the first location approached, Michael and Emma decided to organize a big celebration. They wanted it to be a special event, a chance to thank everyone who had supported them and all those whose lives had become entwined with The New Hope. To them, the place was more than just a restaurant. It was living proof that love and kindness could transform even the hardest situations. On the day of the celebration, the restaurant was decorated with lights and garlands, and each table held a small note from a community member sharing how The New Hope had impacted their life. Michael and Emma invited all the employees, customers, and friends who had been part of their journey, and the place was filled with people of all ages, each with a smile and a hopeful glow in their eyes. As people arrived, Michael and Emma walked among them, greeting guests, listening to stories, and sharing memories. The warmth in the atmosphere was palpable, and the restaurant overflowed with laughter, hugs, and gratitude. Michael took a moment to take in the scene, remembering how it all began, with a dark and desperate night when he felt invisible and lost. Now, years later, he was surrounded by a community that embraced him, by a family he had built, and by a dream that had become reality. During the celebration, Michael and Emma took to a small makeshift stage and asked for everyone's attention. Michael, his smile full of emotion, took the microphone and looked at the people surrounding him. "We're here today because each of you has been part of the new hope," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "This place began as a dream, a promise that kindness could overcome adversity, and each of you has been part of that journey. Thanks to your support, your encouragement, and the faith you placed in us, we have come this far." Emma, her eyes brimming with tears and a peaceful smile on her face, took Michael's hand and added, "For many of us, the new hope has been a place of second chances, a place where we can be ourselves without fear of judgment. Here, we've found family and learned that love and respect can heal any wound. Each person here has brought something special to this space, and it's thanks to you that we've built something greater than ourselves." The audience erupted in applause, and some attendees began sharing their own stories. They spoke of how the new hope had helped them in difficult times, of how they'd found work, friendship, and comfort in this place. For many, the restaurant had been a lifeline, a beacon amidst the storms they faced. After the speeches, the staff, inspired by Michael and Emma, prepared a special dinner for everyone present. The solidarity plates were crafted with care, and each person who came to the table found a welcoming place where, regardless of their story, they were received with the same respect and warmth. Memories and laughter flowed, filling the space with a warmth that embodied the very essence of the new hope. At the end of the night, as the restaurant began to quiet down, Michael, Emma, and Matthew stayed to see off the last guests. When the final person had left, Michael paused to take in the empty restaurant, the echo of the celebration still resonating in the walls. He knew his life had been forever changed, and that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, the new hope would always be the place where his past and present had found reconciliation. Emma and Matthew joined him, and together they looked out over the restaurant in silence. Michael took their hands, and the three shared a look of mutual understanding and love. They knew that their mission didn't end there. They were committed to spreading their message of hope wherever it was needed, and with its growth, the new hope would continue to transform lives and bring comfort to those who sought it. That night, Michael, Emma, and Matthew closed the doors of the restaurant, aware that the new hope was more than just a physical space. It was a promise that love, compassion, and generosity could change the world, one person at a time. As they walked home together, they knew that no matter which path they took, they would always share a mission and purpose, to build a future where everyone could find a second chance and a place they could call home. The promise of hope and dignity fulfilled in every corner of the restaurant would live on in their hearts, guiding their steps toward a future full of possibilities. Thank you for joining us on this journey of second chances, hope, and resilience. The story of the new hope is proof that love and compassion can transform lives, and together we can build a world where everyone has a safe place, a home, and an opportunity to start again. If this story inspired you, please subscribe and share this video with those who also believe in the power of kindness. Remember, with each small act of kindness, we can be the new hope for someone. See you in the next video, and never forget that second chances are always possible.